Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Severe Weather Season Outlook for 2023. It's the information session. For those joining us for the first time, welcome. And for anyone who joined us for our webinars before, welcome back. Before we begin proceedings, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to traditional owners of all the lands we are gathered on in the states and territories across Australia, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Today, our experts will give an in-depth look at 2022-2023, our wet season, and learn how the Bureau's outlooks for the months ahead can help you make important decisions for the season. You'll get an in-depth look at what we can expect weather-wise in the coming months and how you can get ready for it with our experts from the Bureau of Meteorology and Get Ready Queensland. My name is Danny. I will be your moderator today. I'm joined by Tamika Tahima and Laura Bokel, who will be producing today's webinar. Together, we'll help make this webinar as interactive as possible. Before we start, may I ask for your attention as we cover off some housekeeping items, please. With the current situation as it is in Australia, the webinar will be conducted from our respective homes and offices spaces across the country. Please bear this in mind as we may encounter some technical issues during the broadcast. Our broadcast today will run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions. The webinar is also being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email. For first-time webinar attendees, please see some helpful tips on your screen. Just take a moment to have a look there. Most importantly, please note the chat icon where you can send through any questions or feedback for the presenters during the session, and we will answer as many as possible during the allotted breaks. It's the speech bubble button labelled chat on the top of your screen. The icon will be underlined when it's on. If you want to test out the chat box now, feel free. Tell us your name and where you're dialing in from, please. Thank you to everyone who has sent in questions during the registration process. We've used them to help shape the content you'll see today, and we'll get through as many as we can. And finally, I am delighted to introduce you to our presenters. From the Bureau, we have Harry Clark, Jess Carey, and from Get Ready Queensland, Kate Redsky. Harry is a senior meteorologist with 7 years' experience in providing weather forecasts and warnings in Queensland. Harry is passionate about helping emergency services and customers understand the forecast so they can better prepare and respond to severe weather events. Jess has over 14 years' experience as an operational hydrologist specialising in flood forecasting and warning in Queensland. He acts as a key liaison for emergency service agencies in times of flooding, ensuring they have the best information to make the best decisions to respond accordingly. Kate Redsky is an engagement and communication specialist with a keen interest in behaviour change and public participation. Her career spans media, construction, science health, and now natural disaster preparedness. As manager of Get Ready Queensland, Kate's role is focused on encouraging Queenslanders to build more resilient households, business and communities. We also have Tamika and Laura, who I introduced before, and they will be covering questions in the background. So we have the best of the best at the Bureau looking after you for today's webinar. We have a packed hour for you today, including recent conditions, climate outlook, and how you can get ready. But let's not keep you waiting any longer. Let's get straight to Jess Carey. Jess will start off our first topic, recent weather conditions. Don't forget, you can add your questions answered today, so send them in as soon as you think of them. And I'll hand it over to you, Jesse, all yours, mate.
Thanks, Daddy. G'day, everyone. As Danny was saying, I'll take you through some recent conditions and how we might be setting up. So before we get right into it, here's a slide that we'll come back to later in the day. But just to start us off, this is a summary of all of the major hazards that we would be looking at this time of the year. And as you can see, this is obviously a summary of Australia-wide, but of particular mention for us in Queensland, and Harry will go into more detail about this later on. Widespread flooding with the red arrow going up meaning increased chance, and certainly the drought and dust with the green arrows pointing downwards are certainly two big takeaways. More likely for widespread flooding and increased tropical cyclone numbers, and far less likely drought and dust. And we'll get into the reasons for that a little bit later on. But I suppose if you take nothing more away from today, that's a pretty good start. So recent conditions, what have we seen? So we're sitting here obviously in early October. What you can see on your screen at the moment is a map of Australia with a lot of blue shading on it. Now that blue shading indicates areas that have recorded above average or very much above average, or in fact even in the tableland inland of Townsville and Cairns, those really bright blue colours, the highest on record. So the rainfall in those areas, or pretty much across the whole state, between July and September of this year, so over the last 3 months, has been pretty much above average across the whole state of Queensland, and I'm sure that doesn't come as much of a surprise to us here. But obviously, this really heavy rainfall has fallen on the back of quite a significant severe weather season, 2021 to 2022, and it really just hasn't stopped raining. So just showing you now, I suppose, just an indication for that. I suppose connecting that early season rainfall and indicating as to whether that's normal for this time of the year. So that map on the left there, you can see areas of blue shading. Now they're areas of Queensland that have recorded 50 millimetres of rainfall since the 1st of September. So the darker the blue, the earlier in September that rainfall was recorded. And that map on the right there that indicates the green shading, that shows you how early that rainfall was. So you can see those dark green colours indicate that right through those areas in southern central and central Queensland, getting that rainfall in early September is really quite unique. So those areas that are highlighted as grey at the moment basically just mean that they haven't quite seen that sort of significant rainfall, but we are expecting that they'll be recording those rainfalls in the not too distant future. Quick little run through of the temperature for that July-September period. So you can see right through southern Queensland, those areas of blue shading indicating cooler than average temperatures for our daily temperatures. So doesn't come as much of a surprise if it's been very rainy. It's obviously been quite cloudy and therefore suppressing those daytime temperatures. So you can see there, particularly in the southern half of Queensland over that 3-month period, it's been particularly cool in the daytimes. However, when we have a look at the nighttime temperatures, you can see a bit of a different story there. We can see areas of yellow or above average nighttime temperatures. Now, this might seem a bit confusing on face value, but if you have a think about all that cloud that's out there suppressing the temperature in the daytime, it acts as a bit of a blanket and keeps that warmth close to the surface for the nighttime. So it actually the outcome is cooler daytime temperatures but warmer nighttime temperatures, and that's certainly an indication of the season that we've been in over the last few months. So what's that done to our soil moisture? The biggest map of Australia you can see there on the left-hand side indicates the soil moisture, the modelled soil moisture for September 2022. And unsurprising, most areas of Queensland have got above average soil moisture. The two smaller maps of Australia there, you can see the corresponding times in September 2021 and September 2020. And you can see there that whilst there are some areas that have got wet soil moisture at those times of the year, it has not been as widespread or as significant as what we're seeing this year. So basically the takeaway from this is we've had some quite wet conditions, and it's left catchments significantly wetter than what we've seen in the last couple of years, and therefore really primed for widespread flooding. We have a look at water storages now. That these are weirs and dams that we use for, some are flood mitigation, others are just water storage weirs and dams. Pay close attention to the green and the blue circles. Now these indicate storages that are either full or very close to full. The size of the circle is connected to how big the storage is. And if you look in southern Queensland, where we've seen that really wet, sort of significantly wet conditions, you can see most of those dots are green or blue. And if I cast your eyes to that big orange circle in central Queensland there, That's Fairbairn Dam, which is significantly dry at the moment, but we know from previous events that can fill and spill very quickly. So really takeaway message here is that most of the storages in Queensland are quite wet, and particularly in southern Queensland already very full as well. Evapotranspiration, obviously with all of that cloud cover through southern Queensland, the significance of evapotranspiration that we've recorded over that September period, you can see has been suppressed. Obviously, hasn't been as much sun as we would usually see, so therefore the evapotranspiration has been suppressed as well. So if we connect all those things together, we've got wet soil moisture, we've got full water storages, and we've also got decreased levels of evapotranspiration. So there's three really strong indications that we've got really wet catchments and really primed for a significant, widespread flooding year. I'll just hand back to Danny now.
Thank you for starting off today, Jess. That was great, mate. Before we get to our second topic, climate outlook, let's get some of your questions. Remember, hit the little speech button on the top of your taskbar and start sending them in. We'll have a full team on deck to answer your questions. And I do have a couple here, Jesse, from one of our audience members. First question is, how do I sign up to receive alerts and or warnings?
It's a great question. Probably start by reminding everybody to get onto your phones and download the Bureau app. It's gone through quite a significant update recently, which now allows you to subscribe for notifications. So if you're, for example, in Rockhampton and there is a flood warning in place, you will get notified via our app. So things like severe weather warnings, severe thunderstorm warnings, flood warnings, fire weather warnings, all these sorts of things, you can now get notified via your phone. So that's probably, I would suggest, the primary answer. That's another big takeaway, a bit of homework for everyone to go away and download that onto your phone and set it up for your part of the world. If you don't have a phone or you want another method, there should be, hopefully in the not too distant future, a chat, a link in the chat that'll allow you to sign up for email updates for things like climate outlooks and other information that the Bureau puts out periodically. So have a look in the chat, and I'm sure one of our helpers will put that link in as well. So bit of homework for everyone today. Definitely get your BOM app, and if you'd like some regular email communication, there's certainly that option as well.
Thanks, Jess. Just one more from our audience members. Great to see so many questions and so many people online. Jesse, what upgrade improvements have been made to the flood warning and observations network?
Yeah, another great question, Danny. Look, we've got over 3,500 rainfall and river level stations across Queensland that feed into our flood warning service. And since the event earlier this year, there's been quite a lot of work that's happened. Obviously, local councils, state government, and also the Bureau have been busy out there maintaining all of those gauges. Obviously, with such a significant severe weather season, there were some damaged gauges, which I'm happy to report most of those have been now repaired. And in terms of new stations, I know, for example, in North Queensland, there's been a very large project up in North Queensland to install a lot of new rainfall and river level stations in North Queensland, and the Bureau is heavily invested in, I think it's nearly 400 new pieces of equipment across Australia, and a good portion of those are based in Queensland. And another important improvement is we've seen the introduction of the Taroom radar, and more recently the Richmond radar as well. So for those of you playing home, I'd really encourage you to get onto our website, have a look at all this new data that's on there, particularly those two new radars that have come online, which certainly puts us in a really good position for the severe weather season that's coming up right now.
Thanks for that, Jess. Great presentation, mate. Our final question and answer session is coming up in just a bit, so we'll get more of your questions then. And before we do move on to Harry, just all these slides, the webinar session, etc., will be emailed out to everybody. So just make sure that you will get a copy of this whole presentation once we are finished as well. Right now, Harry Clark will be talking about our next topic, climate outlook. Take it away, Harry.
Thank you very much, Danny. Now, I guess what better place to start for a climate outlook than by looking at the sea surface temperatures around the globe? Because when we think of climate and what really drives our climate outlooks, it is largely the ocean. So this map here is the sea surface temperature anomaly observed over the last few weeks. And we can see sort of two characteristic features that are really standing out in this map. One is the really cool tongue of water extending across the Pacific Ocean. So that's denoted by the blue colours in that black box there. That black box is the area we measure our NINO 3.4 sea surface temperature observations in, essentially what helps guides our sort of declaration of El Nino, La Nina. In the Indian Ocean, we can see an area of cooler waters in the Western Indian Ocean and an area of warmer waters in the Eastern Indian Ocean, denoted by those two boxes as well. So once again, this is where we looking at the Indian Ocean dipole, which is our climate driver in the Indian Ocean. And once again, we can see that the cooler water is well away from Australia and the warmer water is near Australia. It's probably worth pointing out as well, all that warm water that is to the north and northeast of Australia. We know that warmer water really drives, evaporation and eventually rainfall. So we do see, all that warm water being a key indicator of our climate outlooks going forward. Now, just jumping to the next slide, please, Tammy. Let's look at our El Nino Southern Oscillation outlook. So essentially, this is the outlook we look at for declaring El Nino and La Nina. And what we see based on those observed sort of sea surface temperatures, we do have a La Nina underway in the Pacific Ocean. Now, this is the third consecutive season we have seen a La Nina present. And models indicate that it will be a relatively short-lived event with a likely return to neutral conditions in early 2023. And we do know that La Nina is our wet phase for rainfall around Australia in the Pacific Ocean. Now, looking at some of the sort of model plots on the right-hand side here, what we can see is this is a number of different models, weather models or climate models, in the sort of boxes there. And we can see that the sea surface temperature that's being shown by these models is in that blue section. So sea surface temperatures exceeding the thresholds for La Nina. The top graph is for October, the second graph is for November, and the bottom graph is for December. So we can see that looking firmly established in October and November and starting to weaken in some of the modelling come December. So the trend is for it to be at a peak in the next few months and then easing into early 2023. Now, why is this important and what does this do to our weather? So we know that La Nina is essentially stronger than normal trade winds. So that really helps to pile up those warmer waters around Australia and increase evaporation and convection as a result. So we get these really broad sort of atmospheric circulation cells, which we call a Hadley cell, and it really sort of ramps that up. So increased rainfall is the primary result. Essentially, if you're thinking of El Nino, it'd be the opposite. We'd see all that sinking air around Australia, and from that, less rainfall. But being in the La Nina state, we know that above average rainfall is the likely outcome this year. Now, we also know that La Nina can lead to more tropical cyclones than average. Knowing what we know about the soils from Jess's presentation, looking at widespread flooding as well. And in terms of drought and heat wave, it tends to decrease the chance of seeing those. Now let's look at our other main climate driver, which is the Indian Ocean dipole. Now the Indian Ocean dipole measures the sort of temperature gradient across the Indian Ocean. And once again, we know a negative Indian Ocean dipole event is underway. So that's the wet phase of this climate driver. Our outlooks indicate this is likely to continue into the very early part of summer. And once again, it is a really wet phase. The bottom left chart there is the sea surface temperature or IOD index for the last 3 years or so. So there's a few notable features on this chart. Firstly is the really big spike that occurred in 2019. So there was a really big positive phase of the Indian Ocean dipole, which is a dry phase. And if we think back to 2019, that was a huge year for heat waves and bushfires right across Australia. So you can see the key sort of impact that climate driver had on our weather at that time. Now in more recent times, you can see the index has been in the negative. So below that light sort of dashed blue line there, looking back at the July 2021, you can see it was only sort of short-lived and just below that blue line, which is the threshold for an negative Indian Ocean dipole to be declared. Looking at this year, though, the most recent part of that plot, you can see it's been solidly below that blue line for quite a while now, and that has shown sort of the strength of this negative Indian Ocean dipole compared to the last season. So it certainly has been a fairly strong negative Indian Ocean dipole. And looking at the charts on the right now, this is the model forecast for that over the coming months. So once again, similar to the last slide we saw, the models in October show very firmly that the Indian Ocean dipole is in the negative phase. As we move into November, it does sort of scale back a little bit, and by December, it looks to be largely back towards neutral. So this is an expected behaviour for this climate driver. Once the monsoon develops across the Indian Ocean, it essentially breaks up this pattern that leads to the Indian Ocean dipole. So the Indian Ocean dipole is really a winter and spring climate driver, but when we think of La Nina, it's more of a spring and summer climate driver. Now, why is the Indian Ocean dipole important? Very similar to the La Nina. It is all to do with the atmospheric circulation and how it predisposes that to occur. So this diagram here is for the negative Indian Ocean dipole, or the negative phase of, and you can see all that warmer water near Australia. So increased evaporation, increased convection, and when we do get weather systems come across, it means they have more moisture to play with. So increased rainfall is the result. And on the right here, you can see the typical sort of negative Indian Ocean dipole effects on our rainfall and large parts of the country in a typical negative IOD year in that sort of green or blue sort of rainfall decile, which denotes above average rainfall. And certainly that's what we've seen over the last few months. So once again, negative Indian Ocean dipole predisposes us to an increased chance of flooding, generally cooler days, as we've seen as well, and warmer nights, and more rainfall. So thinking of that combined with our La Nina, we've really got both oceans around Australia combining to lead to an increased chance of rainfall over the coming months. Now, speaking of the outlook, this is our climate outlook from the climate modelling that is run on a regular basis here at the Bureau. So a few things to unpack here. This is for the next 3 months from November to January. First of which is maximum temperature. We can see that blue or potentially green signal across much of particularly southern Queensland and the interior of Queensland. And that is denoting below average maximum temperatures are likely for this period. So increased cloudiness likely a result of this, and that's what we expect with La Ninas and negative Indian Ocean dipole. The middle chart is the temperature outlook for the minimum temperatures, broadly above average over most of Queensland. So once again, that fits in what we've seen with the last few months, increased cloudiness likely leading to above average minimum temperatures over the coming months. And finally, and probably the most important chart here is the rainfall outlook for the coming months. Really good signal for above average rainfall to continue for the November to January period. So we know that this, increased chance of above average rainfall will be falling on saturated soils and full dams. So that does lead to a high risk profile for further flooding. That can be both flash flooding in short intense bursts of rainfall, but also longer period riverine flooding, which we've already seen a lot of over the last 12 months. Also to note here is the little maps below each of these in the green. Essentially, that is the accuracy or the skill of our outlooks by region. You can see for most of Queensland, we're well into the green, which means that there is sort of meaningful takeaways you can grab from these charts. It's much better than just forecasting the average. So just showing that there is some skill there. It does vary by region. Some areas less predictable than others, but certainly an important one to go along with this as well. Now looking a little bit further ahead into deep summer, December to February, it's a very similar pattern. We do see maximum temperatures likely to remain below average. We do see minimum temperatures likely to remain above average, and we do see rainfall likely to remain above average as well. So not quite a strong signal for rainfall, likely due to the early demise of the La Nina, but certainly a wet signal continuing for the next while. Now, just looking at extremes for a second. So this is chance of unusually wet or unusually dry. So that's unusually wet being rainfall in the top 20% of historical records and unusually dry being in the bottom 20%. You can see in the left one, which is unusually wet, the green denotes roughly a 2 to 3 times more likely to see those unusually wet conditions compared to a normal year over much of Queensland over the coming months. So we are likely to see, potentially rainfall in the top 20% of historical observations. So going to show that there is a risk of that higher end rainfall. On the other side, though, we do see that's virtually nil risk of seeing unusually dry conditions continuing. So the takeaway from this is we're much likely to see wetter than average conditions continuing. And this is a similar sort of graph for the maximum temperatures. So this is going to be unusually warm or unusually cool. You can see there's no strong signal for unusually warm across Queensland with either grey or white. So no strong indication of unusually warm conditions, unusually warm being the top 20% of historical temperature records. But there is a fair signal for unusually cool, particularly in southern Queensland. So we do see a good chance of seeing unusually cool conditions over the next few months. And the same for minimum temperatures. So very good signal for unusually warm minimum temperatures in the north of the state, and not much of a signal for unusually cool minimum temperatures, which really matches what we're expecting to see in a La Nina or negative Indian Ocean dipole. Now, the stream flow outlook. What does that all that sort of rainfall outlook mean for our streams and rivers? The blue dots really say it all. We are expecting above average stream flows for the October to December period, virtually all gauges across Queensland, and that's a combination of the above average soil moisture and the above average rainfall outlook. So once again, reinforcing that flooding will be a key risk over the coming months. We saw the observed northern rainfall onset. This is what the modelling is suggesting. So we have seen the modelling suggests there's a very good chance of seeing an early rainfall onset. That's the chance of a cumulative the observation of 50 millimetres cumulatively over since September 1st, and a very green signal across Queensland. So likely to see an earlier northern rainfall onset across much of Queensland. Now, thinking of tropical cyclones, this graph here is essentially looking at all the past years of observed tropical cyclones around Australia and colour-coded based on what the ENSO status was, whether it was La Nina, a strong La Nina, a weak La Nina, or if it was El Nino or a strong or weak El Nino. So what this graph shows is the seasons that had higher tropical cyclone numbers were really mostly in that La Nina, either a weak La Nina or a moderate to strong La Nina phase. So knowing what we know about the current climate driver outlook of La Nina being present over summer, that means we do have an above average risk of tropical cyclone activity for the upcoming season. So the eastern region, which is essentially all the oceans east of Cape York Peninsula, we do have a 74% chance of more tropical cyclones than average, average being around 4 for this region, and one of 2 of those making landfall. We also see with this sort of La Nina outlook, the first tropical cyclone season often occurs earlier than usual compared to non-La Nina years, and the wet season rainfall in general is likely to be above the long-term average for Northern Australia. Changing gears for a second, thinking of fire outlook, it really is the opposite story. So all this rain certainly led to a lot of grass growth. So there is still, a risk of particularly grass fires over the coming months. But certainly it has meant that many of our forests are sort of quite wet and predisposed to not burning as much. So there's no, when you take the sort of above average grass fire potential, but the below average forest fire potential, it's generally a normal to potentially below average fire outlook season coming up, but certainly doesn't mean fires can't occur. We see fires every year, and we have seen fires already this year, but there's no strong signal for an above average bushfire season with this outlook. And very quickly, just another summary to really drive home that messaging across Australia. The sort of flooding, both flash flooding and riverine flooding, is the key risk for this upcoming wet season, severe weather season, summer period. And that's going to be sort of something people really need to pay attention to and get ready for over the coming months. I'll hand it back to you now, Danny.
Thanks, Harry. That was really educational and informative, mate. Thank you for that. And again, great to see so many people online and so many people asking questions. Yeah, it's really exciting to see. Just before we move on, I will go back to you for some questions now, Harry, that we've got from some audience members. How many tropical cyclones do we expect this season? And what does the tropical outlook say? I know you've sort of already answered that before, but if you can just rehash these for us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Danny. Look, the 74% chance of above average tropical cyclone season, knowing that the average is around 4 for the eastern region with 1 or 2 of those crossings. So certainly an increased risk of that. And I really want to point out as well that it's all of Queensland that can see tropical cyclone activity. So not just those in the tropics. We have seen tropical cyclones in the past around the Gold Coast into the northern New South Wales, and even last year over in Western Australia, we saw tropical cyclone Seroja cross near Kalbarri, which is an equivalent latitude to around Sydney. So just because you're in the south doesn't mean we can't see these impacts, and we really do need to be prepared on the chance that we do see one of those impacting further south. So an above average tropical cyclone season is favoured given the La Nina we have present.
Which helps me segue to the next question, Harry. And I know you sort of touched on this before, but if we could just go over them again as well. But when is the current La Nina expected to weaken?
Yeah, thank you, Danny. So I guess it'd probably be best comparing this to what we saw last year. So we know that we did see a La Nina last year and indeed the year before. So that's only sort of the third time we've seen a three-peat in our sort of recorded history of ENSO. In terms of how it compares directly to last year it was quite a late starting La Nina, so it started around November but continued right through to June. Whereas this year we're looking at conditions starting earlier, so we've already declared it from September, but likely to finish earlier as well. So modelling indicating early 2023 we're likely to return to neutral conditions. So certainly doesn't mean the risk of heavy rainfall and flooding will cease from January or February. Certainly will be deep in the wet season then, but we do see likely that this La Nina will end earlier than those previous years.
Thanks for that. And a similar question, when is the current negative Indian Ocean dipole expected to weaken, in brackets to neutral, and why does this happen, Harry?
Yeah, look, likely to see the negative Indian Ocean dipole return to neutral around December, and that is due to the winds in the monsoon as that develops across the Indian Ocean and Northern Australia, disrupting the pattern that is the Indian Ocean dipole. So that's very typical. Likely to lose that climate driver in around December, and then likely to lose the La Nina and return to neutral in the early new year. So we do have still a number of months to get through them before that occurs, and the risk will remain either way.
This is actually a good question, but what is the current La Nina like compared to this time last year? And has there ever been 4 in a row, Harry?
No, we haven't ever observed 4 in a row. And in terms of the La Nina's strength compared to last year, it's probably similar. But certainly the risk profile is probably a little bit more heightened given how saturated the soils are with that wet outlook we have. So, it's not a binary sort of a result. We know every single La Nina is different, but certainly going into the third one now, as well as having the negative Indian Ocean dipole, we do need to be really aware that the risk profile is quite extreme for this upcoming season. So flooding being that key risk going forward.
We've just got a couple more questions here, and Bronwyn has asked if there is any predictable correlation between the severity of cyclones and the sea temperature.
Look, we do know that the warmer the oceans, the more energy that tropical cyclones have to draw off. So certainly if your oceans are too cool, that will limit the intensity of any tropical cyclone you have in that area. In saying that, it's not usually a limiting factor in Queensland. It's more driven by what's happening in the atmosphere, what we call wind shear. That tends to be one of the key limiting factors, and that's not so much driven by the sea surface temperature. So yes and no, we do see sea surface temperature playing a role for the strongest tropical cyclones. You need that really hot and soupy warm water, but it is by no means the only factor that's going to lead to the intensity being either very strong or on the weaker side. Thanks,
Harry. Andrew has a question, which I'll direct to you, Jess. Can the BOM provide tailored streamflow projections with flood level warnings? Have you, Jess?
It's a good question. There are a range of services that the Bureau provides. Streamflow forecasting is something that is on our website now for that 1 to 7 days. but there is a bit of a trigger when we do get into a significant flood event that's going to impact the community. That seasonal and then short-term stream flow forecasting service is sort of replaced by our typical text-based flood warnings. And we've had discussions right across the state, in all states and territories, around the highest risk locations. For example, in Queensland, there's about 145 locations that we provide specific flood warning services to. So we certainly use rainfall, river level runoff models to indicate how high those water levels are going to get, and I suppose around when that's going to happen as well, and that's what you see in our text-based flood warning. So there's a whole raft of services there, touching on the seasonal sort of timeline, which is something I think Harry showed in his presentation. That there's also short-term flow, and then the flood warning service takes over in that sort of 1 to 4 day sort of period. So I guess it's a cascading service, and the service levels are already sort of agreed with emergency services and local councils. So in terms of what's already there, that's how the current system works. But of course, the Bureau is obviously very keen to improve and look at different services and different models and different ways of working. But certainly at the moment, seasonal stream flow, which is an automated service into the short term 1 to 7 day stream flow forecasting service, is all automatically provided on our website. And then the humans value add in that days 1 to 4 sort of time period, and focusing on those really specific forecast locations, and of which there's about 140 in Queensland.
Thanks, Jess. Just one more for you, mate. John has commented that the Nagoa River, I hope I pronounced that correctly, catchment has missed out on rain for a number of years. Jess, what is likely this wet season for that catchment?
It's a really good piece of feedback. I think the narrative is everywhere in Queensland is wet, and that's really true. I've done quite a few field trips out in the Central Highlands, and it's a beautiful part of the world. And going back to my presentation, you did see that big orange circle, which indicated quite an empty Fairbairn Dam. We know Fairbairn's about 1.3 million megalitres. It's bigger than Wivenhoe Dam in southeast Queensland, so it's a very large water storage, which is quite empty at the moment. There certainly has been good storm activity over the last couple of years, and at the Gemmies, which is just near Emerald, they've certainly had a couple of flash floods. But you're quite correct in terms of significant riverine flooding. It has been quite reduced there, and in fact, most of the Fitzroy catchment really hasn't had anything too significant over the past couple of years, apart from maybe some minor to moderate flooding in the Taroom River, in the Dawson River through Taroom. The one thing that the Nagoa River does have is it has its headwaters in the Carnarvon Range or the Carnarvon Gorge country, and we know that's the top of quite a few catchments. Now, we've certainly seen some very significant rainfall and flooding through the Condamine Ballon, but it hasn't really quite reached up into that Carnarvon Range country. So there's every chance that could happen this year, and that's something we'll have to wait and see, I suppose. But trying to pick out exactly where and when this flood activity is going to happen is very tricky. But certainly acknowledge it has been quite dry there. So hopefully we can get something in the middle, something to fill the dam and to give everyone what they need, but not too much, because we don't want to see another major flood through Emerald.
Great work there, Jess, and thank you, Harry. Both presentations are really educational. I've certainly learned a lot, that's for sure. Again, thank you for everyone joining us online. Thanks for your questions and your feedback. Please remember that Laura and Tamika are sending out really good links there to answer your questions, so please check the chat there. We're going to move on now. Our next speaker is Kate Retzke. This is our third and last topic for this session, everybody, and she's from Get Ready Queensland. I'll hand it over to you, Kate.
Yeah, thanks so much, Danny. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really fantastic to be here with you all. Jess and Harry, great work. It's really interesting to hear what we have coming up in the next few months. I'm really thrilled to be here with you today. Of course, it is Get Ready Queensland Week, and that's the time when we're asking everyone in Queensland to get ready for extreme weather before it hits. So being prepared can really be the difference between staying safe and comfortable during severe weather or putting yourself and loved ones in danger. So I'm just going to have a quick chat to you guys today and give you a few helpful hints. I know there's already been some questions about evacuation kits, for example. So pretty keen just to share with you some high-level information and show you where that you can get a little bit more info should you require it. So without any further ado, let's take a look at our 3 steps to get ready. That's what we have here at Get Ready Queensland. So next slide, please, would be fantastic. Awesome, there they are. So step 1 is all about understanding your risk. Step 2, how to make a plan, and step 3, packing an emergency kit. So today I'm going to talk through in a little bit more detail, but just the fact that you guys have dialed in today for this webinar, you're already one step ahead in terms of your preparation. Just knowing what could happen where you live this season is really important. So yes, let's take a look at understanding your risk. It is the first thing that you need to do, because what we know is we live in a really large, beautiful, diverse state, and there's so many different weather events that can happen where you live. In fact, if you do live in Queensland, it's likely that you face more than one risk. So that risk might change over time. So that's why every year it's important to really think about your own personal situation, because 1/3 of Queenslanders actually believe that they are at low risk, and we know that's just not the case. So let's take a look at what can happen. These are some of the main weather risks that we face here in Queensland. You'll all be quite familiar with each of these, of course. And now you need to think about these in terms of your personal circumstances to get a better understanding of how these hazards might impact you and your family. So thinking about your home, thinking about your access to services, your roads and routes in and out of your community, your proximity to waterways, floodplains, bushland, the ocean, all those types of environmental factors are really important to take into consideration to understand your risk. But if you're not sure on where to find that information, it can be quite easy. So if we head to the next slide, we can look at the most simple ways to figure out what risks you could be facing in your area. So really what we just encourage is for people to have a conversation. It's a great idea to have a chat to your neighbours about, any historical weather situations that your street has been in. And certainly your local council is a really good source of local information. We work with all the local governments across the state. So we see the absolute fantastic work that local governments are doing in the disaster management space and helping to prepare their communities to get ready. And then, of course, we have our Get Ready Queensland website as well, which is another source of fantastic information. It links out to a whole swag of different information sources. And this is particularly important to explore if you've just moved to Queensland, or if anyone on the line knows someone who's just moved here, make sure they know about the history of these weather events in the area where you live and help them to get ready. It's all about the community coming together to build resilience in that way. The second of the 3 steps to get ready is making sure that you have a household emergency plan. So what happens if the worst actually does come through? Going through a disaster is extremely stressful, and it can be very, very scary. And the best way that you can support yourself and those in your household is to basically have a plan for your particular situation. So a plan details everything you need to do, where to go, who to call in an emergency. So let's take a look. This week, You have a whole week to just carve out a little bit of time to sit down with those people in your household or your family, your really close connections, and just have a think about what you will do if a severe weather warning is issued for your area. You can see a few ideas on the slide at the moment of what might make a fairly basic but very important household emergency plan. And there are a few other things that you can think about as well on the next slide. You can think about how to reduce the impact to your home specifically by making some small improvements or tidying up around the yard. What happens if you can't get somewhere because the roads are cut off like a chemist? What does that mean for your personal health needs or of those around you? What are some of the items at home that you might want to protect? What's important to you? Noting those down in your plan makes you one step ahead for when those severe weather warnings are issued. And also, who in your circle of family, friends, community should you be in contact with if the worst does happen? And taking that all into consideration is what we call planning as part of our 3 steps to get ready. So you can write your own, or you can also find some information on our website. Again, we have a bit of a template there that you can fill out, because research tells us that Queenslanders really believe that having a plan is important. It gives them peace of mind that they can act quickly when the worst does happen. So let's take a look at the next step now, and that is packing an emergency kit. Natural disasters certainly can cause disruptions to life, but they also cause disruptions to power and gas and water and block your access to the local shops. And if that happens, you can find yourself isolated for a few days. So it's a really good idea to build your own household resilience and have a few supplies on hand for if you do have to bunker down at home for a wee while. And it doesn't take much to put your kit together. It's just a few items to keep your family safe and comfortable for a few days. If you live in urban areas, we basically say it's a good idea to have at least 3 days of supplies on hand. But if you live more rural, consider having a bit of a stockpile for a week or 7 days is probably a pretty good indicator. And you can see on your screen now that there are some items there that you might want to consider packing in your own emergency kit at home. But like I said, they are just ideas. The best thing that you can do is to really think about your own household and those who live there and would need to stay if the worst was to happen, and make sure that your kit has everything that your family needs specifically to stay comfortable and well at home. Of course, there are evacuation centres, and our website goes into a bit of detail about what a quick grab and go bag might look like for what you might want to take to an evacuation centre with you. But ultimately, needing to go to an evacuation centre is a last resort. What we obviously encourage is for people to stay safe and well in their own home. So let's summarize those 3 points to those 3 steps to get ready. We have understand your risk, make a plan, and pack an emergency kit. So it's really not that hard just to do a few small things around the house to get ready for the extreme weather season. But there is one more point that I'd probably be amiss to skip, and that is having to think about your insurance policy. So that's whether you are a renter or a homeowner, make sure that policy is up to date, because we have seen, unfortunately, people get caught out thinking that they are covered, and then when push comes to shove, unfortunately, it wasn't the right cover for them. So it is important to have a chat to your insurance provider or explore your insurance provider options and ask some questions about what cover would be right for you and your situation. And we have a list of questions to help you guide those conversations on our website. So be sure to check those out. And now, as part of Get Ready Week, one of my favourite things all year is the launch of our annual campaign, and I'm really happy to share that with you guys today. What we saw in our research was that Queenslanders just wanted a really simple call to action. What is the one thing that they should be thinking about this year in terms of getting ready? And yesterday we launched our new campaign, so I'm sure you're going to be seeing it on the TV and hearing it on your radio and seeing it as you scroll through your social media pipes. But I just thought today would be a fantastic opportunity to share with you our new television commercial and see if you can pick up our focus for 2022 here at Get Ready Queensland. I don't know about you guys, but I can't hear that one. I'm just looking at my friends over at BOM to see if they might want me to share the audio from my end.
Sorry, Kate, I was going to jump in. Danny, do you want to try and share it from yours end, and we'll see if we can play it?
Sure thing.
Bit of a technical issue on this side, sorry.
Not a problem. All right, let's have a look. I'm just going to skip through all my slides. You get a fantastic summary of everything we've already discussed today. That always helps. And here's the TVC.
This disaster season, make sure you have an emergency kit packed and ready. You'll need a torch and plenty of drinking water. Don't forget spare batteries. Adding a few simple items to your trolley next time you're at the shops will make a huge difference when extreme weather strikes.
Hey JT, pass the pack.
Yeah, still got it. Pack an emergency kit and get ready, Queensland.
Authorised by the Queensland Government, Brisbane.
So that's our campaign for this year. You can see our fantastic ambassador, Jonathan Thurston, having a lot of fun in the supermarket and just reminding Queenslanders that it doesn't have to be overwhelming or difficult to prepare your emergency kit. Just grab a few extra items. We go to the grocery shop multiple times of a week. Well, certainly I do. So just making sure that when you're going down the freshwater aisle or the battery aisle, you can pick up those few extra items that will just make sure that your family is comfortable and safe at home in the face of a disaster. So I really wanted to just thank our sponsors over at Suncorp for helping us put together this year's campaign, and also our 2022 retail partner at IGA. IGA stores across Queensland will be helping to push the preparedness message across the state this year, which is just fantastic. And of course, your local councils will also be doing their very own Get Ready Queensland activities as well. So make sure that you check out what's happening in your area and see what fun you might be able to get involved with this week and in the coming weeks before summer comes. But ultimately, thank you so much for listening today. Make sure you remember those 3 steps to get ready. And if you just do those few small things, it will make all the difference for you and your family. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Kate Reski from Get Ready Queensland. That was great. A lot of feedback coming through there with the Jonathan Thurston ad. So great to see that JT, he's still got it all right, people. Don't worry about that.
Oh, you bet.
Really important presentation there, Kate. And remember, just our audience out there, chat to your neighbours, your friends, your family about Get Ready Queensland and the evacuation kits, and take it with someone who's been caught out in a disaster. To have that evacuation kit is it's life-saving and life-changing. So thank you, Kate. And I do just have one question for you, Kate, from Jeanette, and she has asked, is there a link to the grab and go bag? And just if you could remind us where we can access all of these fantastic resources for the community, and just for our audience, we will post these in the chat.
Yeah, I see someone else has already taken the initiative and posted a link in the chat function, but really easy website for everyone to remember. Just go to getready.qld.gov.au and there is a ton of info just waiting for you to explore.
Thank you, Kate. Well, I hope that gives you a whole lot of information on 2022 and 2023, everybody that's joining us, and how you can get ready for it. I'd like to invite all of our presenters to join us again so we can take some more of your questions. It's the best part when we get the audience questions. This is a great opportunity for you to ask all of our panelists. So please start sending them in and we'll get as many as we can. We'll load those up now. Just bear with us for a minute. They're just coming through. They're just loading up. Just hold the line there. And thanks for the audience feedback today too. The comments and the emojis coming through have been keeping us going. So first question coming through, where can we access information from the Bureau on the different hazards we face in Queensland? And Jess, if you could take that one, please, mate.
Great question. Yes, certainly it's important, I suppose, that we understand the hazards that relate to us, and there is some unique ones in Queensland. Obviously, tropical cyclones don't impact all parts of Queensland, but certainly if you are in Queensland, it's important that you're across it. So if you go to our website, there are a number of knowledge centres, and these are just areas where we've set up a whole bunch of information from historical stuff, the services that you would expect to see from the Bureau when you'd get them, and then obviously what we think you should be doing with them. So really encourage you. Obviously, the Bureau's got millions and millions of pages, literally. But if you go into our search bar and search for Knowledge Centre, there'll be a whole slew of tropical cyclone, fire, flood, all the major hazards. You go in there and get schooled up on things, and then very, very much encourage everybody to go to your local council website as well. Many councils have got a whole heap of information on the types of services and the way to respond and planned locally for you. For example, it might be, hey, did you know this is an area where you can get some sandbags in a flood situation? Here's an evacuation centre for you. So maybe get schooled up on the technical elements from the Bureau, and then go to your local council and get ready websites to understand how you can prepare personally and I suppose in the town and city that you might live in locally.
Thanks, Jess. Just looking for some more questions here coming in from our audience. Just scrolling through. I'll throw this one. One of the questions coming in, I wanted to take this. How far do tropical cyclones track? And is there any indication, a trend, that they are tracking further south? Was there a particularly bad decade in the Gold Coast? Jesse, can you take that? Or Harry, sorry, Harry.
We have to answer that. Thank you, Danny. Certainly, as the oceans warm around the world, we do see the areas susceptible to tropical cyclones shift sort of polewards as the temperatures of the oceans become viable enough in higher latitudes for tropical cyclones to survive further north. So certainly that's a trend we're seeing as the planet warms. In terms of has there been a particularly bad sort of season for the Gold Coast? Certainly, I believe the 50s, there were a number of sort of significant impacts across coast regions, significant erosion because of that, and even up to category sort of 3 strength just off Coolangatta, I believe has been observed in the past. So it hasn't happened for a while, but certainly it is a risk. And certainly it's something that people do need to be prepared for, as just because it hasn't happened in quite some time for many people that have since moved to the region. When it does happen, and it will eventually, it will be a very high impact event. So certainly, as we go forward, cyclones will be making it further south, and the Gold Coast will still be one of those regions that is capable of seeing tropical cyclones.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks for answering the questions, both. Well, that looks like that's all that we have time for in the questions today. There was a lot of information to take in earlier, so if you missed the start, Jess, would you like to summarise what we spoke about today and where we can find more information?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Danny. So going back to that slide, when you first heard from me earlier today, well, I told you we'd show it again. Take-home messages from a hazard point of view, unsurprisingly, in the La Nina and with the wet catchments, increased number of tropical cyclones and an increased chance of widespread flooding, certainly on the cards this year, with a less likely chance of drought and dust, which doesn't really come as much of a surprise, and fairly average or normal sort of risks for the other hazards. So that's, I suppose, a bit of a quick summary of what the Bureau people have spoken about, but obviously Kate took us through the 3 steps: understand your risk, make a plan, and pack a kit. So make sure that's definitely part of your takeaways from today. And in terms of where you'd like to, I suppose, get more information, so I did allude to before, we've got millions of pages literally on the Bureau's website, but here are a few. And obviously, when you get a copy of this presentation after today, you'll be able to come back through. So don't worry if you miss them right now. But here are just a selection of some really good links on the Bureau's website, which I'd encourage you all to peruse at your own at your own time. And then obviously getready.qld.gov.au as well is another one that we shouldn't be forgetting about. And one more thing, we did mention the Bureau's app, but we're obviously on various social media platforms as well, and there's lots of videos and quirky facts and really critical information during severe weather events as well. So encourage everyone to connect with us on all those platforms you can see there. And finally, from us at the Bureau and Get Ready Queensland, thank you very much for dialing in today. And just hand back to Danny if there's anything else before we wrap up.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks for that, mate. If you'd like to get Bureau information on your favourite platform, why not connect with us on social media, our blog, or our excellent BOM Weather app, which now has notifications, and you can subscribe to receive updates direct to your inbox from the Bureau about everything the team has talked about today, or information on upcoming webinars. We're going to do some more of these. But that brings us to the end of our webinar today. For questions that we didn't get to, please email weatherquestions@bom.gov.au. That's weatherquestions@bom.gov.au. If you're grammatically challenged like I am, that's weatherquestions@bom.gov.au. A big thank you to Harry, Jess and Kate for your time in developing the content and sharing your knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Tamika and Laura, for monitoring the chat and providing those resources to the public. And to you, thank you for tuning in and joining us today. Our audience, we wouldn't be here without you. We hope you enjoyed this session, and we do hope you'll join us again next time. If you'd like to continue the conversations, please use the hashtag BOMWebinars in your posts. As mentioned earlier, this session has been recorded, and we'll have the video ready for you on-demand viewing pleasure in the next couple of days. So watch this space. We'll get that out to you ASAP. Finally, but most importantly, we want your feedback. It's our aim to bring you the highest possible quality webinars, but we can't do that unless you share your experiences with us. An email with a short survey will be sent out to you, and we'd be very grateful if you could complete that anonymously for us. Once again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. From the half of the team here, goodbye.